Welcome everybody to the webinar titled Digital Transformation for Publishers, Do's and Don'ts in Digital Publishing. We have a great session mapped out for you all, together with our main speaker, Dani Leyhue. I'm Magdalena, and I'm the Product Marketing Manager here at WoodWing, and I will be moderating the webinar today. Well, let's welcome Dani Leyhue. She's our product manager at WoodWing, and she's joining us from Orlando, Florida in the USA. Good morning, Dani.
Good morning. Happy to be here.
Great. Well, just a short, brief introduction of Dani. Dani is a digital publishing veteran with extensive knowledge and experience in working with a lot of publishers and digital distributors around the world. Dani has helped publishers get into iPad publishing when it was launched. And well, she's currently guiding publishers on how to transform their workflows and be more efficient in multi-channel publishing. But to begin, let's first cover some general housekeeping and run through the agenda. Dani will start presenting with an overview of the history of digital publishing. After that, she'll mention the main challenges faced by publishers and the benefits of digital publishing. And before she runs a demo for you, she will uncover and share expert advices aimed at high-level managers and designers. At the end, we always leave some time for answering your questions that you have throughout the session. And as you know, all attendees are currently on mute, but please feel free to post any question and use the question box on your right in the GoToWebinar panel to submit any queries you have. And we have a few minutes left in the end to try to answer them all. So we have a rich agenda to cover, and I suggest we get started. Dani, would you please start?
Sure. All right. I want to start with talking a little bit about print and how we got to where we are today. So in the beginning, there was print. Print always came first. And for most publishers, it is the main channel that they're thinking of. However, if I take a look back throughout history, starting in around 1971, that is when the first publishers started thinking, how do I take my content and make it digital? So a project called Project Gutenberg was formed, which took books and it took publishings and it put them into a digital format. Roughly 20 years later, we see that the World Wide Web, it started and it's invented. Now, day one, not a lot of people were using the World Wide Web. We know that it took some time for people to adapt to it, to get used to this new format, this new channel. 20 years after that, here comes social media. And so we see that the way that people are posting content, the way that publishers are interacting with social media, that again changes. Right around the same time that social media is launched, here comes the iPad. Suddenly, we now have a lot of publishers who have their own apps. They have their own ways of distributing content. So what we see, if I just look at this timeline, is roughly every 20 to 10 years, there's a large change in publishing. And each time this change comes, you can see that a lot of these companies, what they'll do is, okay, I have a new department that's going to take over. Here's my web department. Here's my social media department. Here's my iPad department. And all of these groups are taking on each of the new channels. So if I look in another, let's say 30, 40 years, are there going to be another 5 departments, another 6 departments? That's what I want to explore a little bit as we go further into the presentation. Now, during 2008, 2009, this is when the iPad boom really began. 2009, Time Inc. was one of the first magazines that was on the iPad at launch. And that's when digital publishing really began to explode. It was a beautiful, beautiful publication. And it was all possible thanks to WoodWing and Enterprise and being able to publish through the software. The real heart here that I want you to focus on is that during this era of the iPad boom, The goal was to make content beautiful, and it was great. It was very visually pretty. If you want to make your content beautiful for one specific platform, you know that you're refining it, you're designing just for that one channel. There are probably ways that we could be a little bit more efficient, which is what I want to get into later today. But just keep in mind that early on, we were focusing mostly on just making things pretty, not on efficiency. If I look at the metrics of how many publishers have mobile apps or at least a website or are distributing their content, those numbers are very high. Now, this is a very outdated number from 2013, but 74% of publishers have at least one mobile app. I would say that that number is probably even higher today, based on the fact that we know that there are websites, there are social media channels, and all of these different channels, apps have to be managed by someone. You have to make sure that that content is going to look the way that you want it to on each of those different devices. And as I'm sure that you're aware, that's a lot of work. So as the number of channels continue to heat up and we have more and more different things to manage, it becomes a struggle. How do I keep up with all of these different devices? How do I keep up with keeping everything modernized? This is expensive, it's time consuming, and it's even harder if you're trying to find the people who can do this translation work, right? Because you know that you're probably going to need an expert, someone that can help you through this process. So it's a challenge, and I understand that. There is a fantastic quote from the CEO of Dotdash Meredith that it's not news to anyone that there has been a pronounced shift in readership and advertising from print to digital. Print is no longer serving the brand's core purpose. So even the large companies and the large publishers are starting to see we need to start embracing this digital channel because people are starting to shift. And while print is still important, digital is taking more and more of a foothold, right? So that every 10 to 20 years of we have the change, we're starting to see, okay, here comes the adaption of we need to start making sure that our websites are as beautiful as possible. But how do we do that efficiently? If I look at UK circulation numbers, this is according to the Press Gazette. If I look at the circulation between 2020 and 2021, you'll see that the numbers start to jump. And part of that is, of course, that we just experienced the pandemic and a lot more people are remote. However, there's a few that I want to circle in specifically on. Let's take Cosmopolitan, for example. If I look at Cosmopolitan's number in 2020, they were at 14, right around 14,000. And then in 2021, that number nearly doubled. Now, there are a couple of reasons why this may have happened, but one of the reasons that I can for sure say is that during that year, between 2020 and 2021, that's when Cosmopolitan went from being PDF and just a static digital edition to having dynamic content and launching their own apps, making sure that everything was seamlessly flowing to all of the different channels that they wanted to go to. So there's a lot of different strategy that is tied into making sure that your content is going everywhere that you want it to and supporting those goals. But again, it's interesting to see that across all of these different publications, things tend to grow. I can only imagine what those numbers will look like in 2022. Another interesting case study is the New York Times. Now, if I take a look at their website, this is a very lovely website that looks exactly like a newspaper. Someone had to sit down and strategically think, how do I want this to look? How do I want this to work? This content is very familiar to someone who's used to a print environment. Now, where this is very interesting is that if you look at the numbers of people who are looking at their print content versus their digital subscribers are roughly 92%, right? So they only have 8% of people looking at their print magazine anymore. And someone within the New York Times, I'm sure, had a cognitive decision as to, we need to make sure that digital is going to be ready, that this is going to be beautiful, and it's going to have the experience that we want our readers to have. So just keep in mind that there are these trends happening, that digital is starting to come up, and it's really important to make sure that we have that digital strategy for what we want our brand to be. Okay. Easier said than done, right? Because there are a lot of challenges with this. So the problems that I've been hearing from the companies that I work with, number one, this is a huge workflow to manage, and you have to track a lot of different information and limited time span. You also have to worry about, how do I get through my process while trying to keep up with deadlines, right? Because a web editor has a different deadline than a print editor. Web editor, I need to have something delivered by end of day. Print editor, maybe I have to have my story finished by the end of the week, or within 2 weeks, or within a month. And that's a huge cultural shift, is trying to rethink your mind as to, am I creating content for print? Am I creating content for digital? Or am I creating content that could be used in either? Now, by that, I mean, present day, a lot of companies have separate teams for print, for digital, for social, and for web teams. That's a common theme that we see. However, some of the most efficient companies and the most profitable, we're seeing that they're going to something called multi-channel. And don't worry, I'll explain more on that. But in order to get to that multi-channel platform, you have to start thinking through your digital strategy, which of course is a complex problem to solve. How do I create a digital strategy? What's involved in a digital strategy? And the first question that I get from most publishers that I talk to is, how do I do this? Especially on a limited budget, what's the right answer? So we're going to talk a little bit more about that as we go through. One really good example of having separate teams and siloed departments is, I was working with a company, they won't mind me sharing this, is that they were writing a story on the Olympics. And so it was going to run in their print magazine, and they had a print editor start writing it, and that editor left the company. So when that happened, they then turned it over to another writer, who then started working on the content, created it. However, that writer had to completely restart the article. They had to revise it. It was enough of a rewrite that he had to do a do-over. Okay, so now you have two people writing the story. They found out later that their web department was running a similar article, same topic, same theme. So now they've essentially had 3 different people writing the exact same story. So you have multiple paths, multiple people that can create this same content, but it's not being shared in a way that's efficient to your company, and it's not saving you the money that you're hoping to. Now, to put this a little bit into a graph form, my first silo is print, right? So this is a very simplified workflow. I know that there are a lot more steps involved, but you start writing the story, you edit it, you revise it, you design it, you start editing it to fit, and then you send it off to printer. Now the next silo is, this is if you're working on the tablet. There's a couple of ways to get onto the tablet. Perhaps you're sending PDFs to a conversion house. That conversion house is re-engineering that print to fit into a digital format. From there, you might edit it or revise it, and then you send it off to your endpoint channel. You also have the web team, who they're existing in their own world, where they're doing their writing, they edit, they revise, they push to your website. All of these people who are doing the writing and the editing live in their own separate worlds. There's no blending of content. But what we're hoping to get to, and where we're starting to see the trend, is a multi-channel workflow. And by that, I mean you have a team of people who are shared. This team can write content, you edit content, you revise it, and from there you can branch it. It can go into a digital channel, and you can publish it directly into wherever you need it to go. That could be Emacs, PugPig, Twixel, WordPress, Apple, your homegrown website, Drupal, wherever that content needs to flow. And then you can also flow it into print by creating a print variant. And the designers can then take that content that's already placed on the page. They don't have to do any copy and pasting. And you can break it apart so that you can do your edit to fit without ever having to touch what was done in digital. I'll show you exactly what that looks like a little bit later. But the main heart of this is that we're trying to merge the fact that we have people working in print and digital all on one team. So a few of the benefits that we're seeing. First of all, for print editors and print writers, when you create a magazine, you send this off and you know that there are great circulation numbers, you know that things are performing well, but you can't actually see the statistics or the analytics on what story is performing well or why. Imagine that for the first time, if your story is also being published up to the website, if your website has analytics, you then can use your web platform to see what stories are performing well. And this is a whole new level of information that print designers, print editors have not had before. So that's a huge benefit of being able to see, oh, what content is tracking well? Can I create more of that? How can I help my circulation? Also, by blending the teams, you're saving a tremendous amount of time. There's a little bit more work up front of making sure that you have the stories planned, you're writing the stories that you want to. However, I know that if I am writing an Olympic story, I'm only going to hire one person to write that story as opposed to having 3 separate people write it and then having to pay 3 separate writers. Also, you have sophisticated workflow configuration. Now, Studio is an amazing product that has been around for a number of years that has workflow configuration. It allows you to be able to control who can write content at what point in time, making sure that people are reviewing what they need to at specific points. You have all of that available to you inside of Studio if you're setting things up front. An additional benefit is that you're consolidating all of your assets into a central content hub. Now, this is a little bit of a new idea that I have all of my stories that I could potentially want saved into one place. Now, right now, you might have some stories saved inside of your website. You might have some stories saved onto Studio. You might have some stories saved onto a local hard drive. If you're saving something onto a local hard drive and you go out on vacation, how is anyone going to access those stories when you're not around? It's creating a central library of information that could then be used as many places as possible, and you can maximize that efficiency and that return on the investment to create the content. So some interesting ideas that are attached to this are you can reuse that content in different platforms. So if you're hiring someone to write a story for print, you could then also use that same content inside of your digital platform, inside of your web platform, on top of social media. So there's a lot of reusing of content. If you're a large publisher and you have multiple brands, think about the possibility of you could even potentially, depending on your copyrights, reuse that content in a different brand. So I hire someone to write my story for my cooking magazine, and then later on, hey, that same recipe, that could be used for a fitness magazine. It could also be used over here. So there's a lot of repurposing and reusing of content as opposed to continuously having to create new content in every single channel. Another benefit is that when all of your brands start to move towards this multi-channel workflow, is that you can easily deploy your content to multiple endpoints. So I have the ability of being able to send one article to all of the channels that I publish to. Very easy, very straightforward. As opposed to present day, there's a small limited number of people who have access to the web platform. Only they can publish it. Okay, but what if I know that this is an amazing story that's breaking news and I have it right now? Well, you probably have to email it to someone who gets sent to another person, and it's a more cumbersome workflow to make sure that you're on the breaking edge. Another benefit to this multi-channel workflow is that we're helping the guy in the graveyard shift. Now, by that I mean, at the end of a publication, you know that there's going to be someone who's waiting for all of the content to be finished because it has to be redistributed to a printer, to a conversion house, to wherever else it needs to go. And that person is desperately scrambling to get things done. And if you do a little bit more planning upfront, making sure that you have all of your templates set up, you're planning, you know exactly what stories you have, you're not scrambling as much on the back end. As soon as the story is finished, it can be pushed and it can send off to wherever it needs to go. And then suddenly, you're no longer waiting at 8 o'clock on a Friday for something to finish, and now it's done by maybe midday Thursday. That's a huge time savings, and it's a lot easier to get the content where it needs to go. An additional benefit to the multi-channel workflow is that print designers are seeing new opportunities. Now, a couple of things that I'm sure that the people who are familiar with web, I'm sure that this is not a new concept to you, but you can do things like having affiliate links. An affiliate link is every time someone clicks on something, I get a small return or a small investment back from that company for promoting their product. If I know that Christmas is coming, then I can create a gift guide, or I can create shopping lists of items that then, oh, suddenly I'm starting to see more and more revenue generated from all of these different affiliate links that are in my publication. I can plan for that to happen. And it makes it easier to create that content and build those affiliate links while you're creating the story. You also can use amazing videos. So in addition to all of those different siloed departments, we also see that there are video departments that create fantastic content. And this content, not referenced in print, but now suddenly you could be using it more on social or on the web or in Apple News. And we know that many of these different platforms have algorithms that are searching for content with interactive features like videos. So you're repurposing your content, you're getting more views inside of your videos, makes everything more holistic, and it matches your brand. Lastly, advertisements. This is a whole new area where people can potentially start to create more dynamic advertisements for their publication. Most publishers are thinking strictly, I need to replicate exactly what was in print and put it into digital for ABC compliance. However, you have the opportunity to upsell creating dynamic advertisements, advertorials, and adding those to your publication as well. It could be a potential form of revenue. So going back to that idea of the content hub, we can see that what you want is the central area where everything exists. And you have a lot of content to manage between items that are coming from your DAM, your headless CMS, your commerce catalogs, your traditional CMSs, contributor content, video, stock photos. Everything has to live somewhere. And at the heart of it, that's the content hub. And from the content hub, you want that to be able to flow to print, to web, to digital, to your archive, potentially even to social, assuming that social is open API and we can get into it. So now we want to hear from you. I'm a little curious as to what challenges you are seeing and why you have not adapted into a multi-channel mindset. So we're going to switch this over to a poll for just one moment.
Yes, as Dani said, we want to hear your opinion about your challenges with a channel-neutral approach. I'm about to launch a poll that you will see on your screens with multiple select questions. It's just one question. I'm going to leave the poll on for a minute so you all have the time to respond. And afterwards, we will launch the results so everybody can see. Here it goes. So please take a few minutes to read and answer. And as I said, after majority has voted, we will close the poll and launch the results so everybody can see them.
Watching everyone's numbers come in, this is interesting. We'll show you in a moment. All right. Looks like we've got a pretty good percent of people who have submitted that poll.
Okay, do you want me to close the poll?
Yeah, let's go ahead and close it.
Okay. I believe around 60% of the attendees responded. So closing this now and sharing the results now. So here it goes.
All right, so interesting here that cultural change in our organization is hard to manage. I completely understand. That is a very hard area to navigate through. I also understand that it's hard to learn about becoming channel neutral. There's not a lot of resources out there yet. I'm hoping to change that. Cost of moving is not in our budget. I understand that. Okay. And then other internal product projects taking priority. Okay. Yep, that tends to be the main areas that I hear. So it's good to have that reinforced as well.
Yeah, and it's good to hear that publishing to multiple platforms is not one of their goals. It's actually just 4% of the people that answered. So that's the least of the major roadblock for the publishers participating in this webinar. Okay, I'm gonna close and hide the results so Dani can continue with her presentation. Thanks.
All right. Now let's get into tips and tricks. Let's talk about, first of all, high-level managers, areas to focus on, things to work through. So number one, defining your goal. What business outcome are you hoping to achieve? Because if you don't have a goal of, I want my content to flow to print, to digital, to tablet, it's hard for different companies and it's hard for us to find out how can we support that goal. So that comes with defining what your business outcome is, understanding what metrics and results you want, and having a SMART goal that can lead to empowered data-based change. And by that, I mean, if you want to have 10% of your content, let's start there, from web also flow into print. It starts small, right? And then you can manage and you can see, oh, this is the percent of change that we have. We can see that. And then suddenly the next quarter, hey, let's try 25%. Let's try 50%. So there are ways that you can start small, but making sure that you have a SMART goal that's attached to data and making sure that it's something that you can measure. From there, and this is a really big one, I also respect that this is a little hard, is culturally merging the print, the web, and the digital teams. Oftentimes when people come to me wanting to go channel neutral, the only team that's in the room is the print team. And it's a little bit of a mistake, because truthfully, you need the combined help of the print team, the web team, and the digital team. All of those people are stakeholders in this decision, and making sure that everyone is working together so that, bottom line, everyone has the same content and that you have the ability to flow this content everywhere that it needs to go. So it's making sure that while print, which has been king for many years, is not the only person in the room. It's making sure that you have the right people, the right players available to you. And then lastly is finding an expert to help you understand the big picture. If you're only focused on one endpoint at a time, or if you're only narrowed and zooming in on one area, you're never going to see the big picture of, oh, we could also go to this platform. Oh, we could also be doing this area. So make sure that you have someone that can answer all of those questions for you and help you see that big picture process. It's also really important to learn what's possible in each endpoint. A good example of this is if I know that I want to build a really beautiful widget for my website, I can spend all of the time on the world, but if it's something that WordPress can't handle my widget because it's in a different code language, I just did a lot of work for something that's never going to be supported. So you kind of have to do a little bit of investigation as to what every platform can do so that you can build and maximize the way that your brand is reflected on each of those different platforms. All right, going over to the designers. This is both for the print designers and the web designers, but I want to talk a little bit about how all of this content flows. So on the left-hand side of the screen, this is a story on a mobile device. On the right-hand side of the screen, I rebuilt that same story in something like InDesign so that you can see all of the different frames and the boxes. Think of a story in digital content as being a little bit like a reverse game of Tetris. You know how in Tetris you have one block that stacks upon another block on another block. Well, digital content is a lot like that, except we're in reverse. We start with an image box, then we have a title box, a subtitle, etc. So you're stacking all of these boxes one on top of the other. Inside of digital and inside of Studio, we call these boxes components. So you're creating all of these different components that build together that will create your story. Now, the reason why we're creating this dynamic content is because components can flow nicely into different areas. Good analogy here is if you take a piece of paper, or if I take a print magazine and I put it into a vase, that print magazine is going to be very small inside of that vase. I may or may not be able to read it depending on how the content fits inside of the vase. I know that it's going to be a fixed layout. If I am creating things inside of a component that is dynamically able to reflow, think of it as being like water. As I pour it into different vases, as I pour it into different containers, it is going to reshape and reflow into whatever size object it goes into. So on the left-hand side, that's what your PDF rendition would look like, also what your EPUB would look like. On the right-hand side, this is what it would look like on a website, on a mobile device. This is what we call dynamic content. Now, if someone is looking at your content on an iPhone, which one of these is going to be more engaging to the reader? In most apps and in most digital distribution channels, you have between 2 to 3 seconds to capture the reader's interaction. If they can't read the body copy of the image on the left, how do you know that they're going to read your story? They're more likely to read the one on the right. When you start to work on a digital publication and starting to think through dynamic content, you don't want to completely replicate print. You want to use items absolutely from print. You want to rehabilitate that. However, you're trying to capture the spirit, and that's a very different concept than trying to completely repurpose and do something on a different channel. So dynamic content, it's not quite digital, it's not quite print, it's somewhere in between as its own channel. Also, when you start to create a digital look and feel, you want to use similar styling to give people a sense of context. Am I in this publication? Am I looking at something on a tablet? Am I looking at, does it match what the website looks like? How do I know what publication I'm even in? So using repeated elements across your print, across your digital, making sure that you have those helps give people a sense of, oh, I know exactly what magazine that I'm reading. Now, the first time people start working on a digital publication, I often start with, let's define what your component styles are. A component style, again, think of those components as being the different boxes. You're creating all of my different boxes for, oh, this is what a title could look like. Here's title option 1, here's title option 2. Think of this as being a glorified paragraph style if you're used to print. So you're defining upfront all of these different options. Digital is a little bit different from print in that you're not continuously adding new fonts every single month. You don't want to switch those out. You're probably not redesigning your website every month. So you want to make sure that you pick fonts that are going to work for the web, have all of the glyphs that you need, and it will make sure that it has the spacing that you want available to you. Now, how those components flow into print. Let's talk about that. The way that an article or a multi-channel article, also called a digital article, flows is that we create the article in blocks. So here I have a digital article with block A, block B, block C, and then maybe an image. I take that article and I can publish that article to each of my different endpoints, and it's going to reflect exactly the way that I want it to on that endpoint. That's because I have my template set up and defined as to, this is what it will look like when it goes to this channel. When it comes to print, you have the ability to create a print variant, which will call to a print layout template. Now, where those articles end up on the page depends on your print template. Do you want all of the items in a specific arrangement? You could have different options as to, maybe in the print layout 1 option, all of them are directly on the page. Or maybe you go to print layout 2, where only item B is on the page and everything else goes to the pasteboard. Then the designer can choose to pick and place things exactly where they want to. Or maybe you want everything to go to the pasteboard and it's easier for the designer just to start working with the different pieces. The bottom line here is that the designer is still in the empowered position to be able to control and finesse the design as they need to. What we're doing is just getting things into the InDesign file so that they don't have to do the copy and paste. That's what we're looking to do, is death of copy and paste, so that everything flows through easily. Now, when you start thinking about what articles would this work for in my magazine, start making a list. Try one article first. The very first one on my list is one simple page of text. It could be just a basic article inside of your magazine. Start testing. What would you want this to look like? How would it flow? And then from there, you can start to build the rest of your list. Most magazines have something like a masthead, an editor's letter, letters, interviews, a couple of different feature stories, some style or beauty, some recipes. And you can see that there are going to be trends that you'll probably have month to month. You don't want to create too many templates because then it just becomes a larger list. It's harder to manage. But if you can get down to a smaller subsection of articles, that's a more easy list to manage. And then it can help you define, oh, this same title could work across these different pages. And it helps put things into a more obtainable goal of templates that you need to manage. Couple of things to avoid as you are starting to create channel neutral content. The editors at the start, you're no longer creating those multiple columns of text. You're now thinking in one long column. And then once it goes into the print, that's when you can start to do those multiple columns of text. But up front, when you're writing the content, you're just focused on, let's write that content. You're also trying to remove referencing page numbers until the print variant is created. So for example, I don't want to write in my subtitle, story continued on page 147 or 137, because every time you do that, you now have to go back into the digital article, change it so that it doesn't go up onto your website, and it can reference a different article instead. When you're writing captions and you're linking different images, you want to make sure that your information references what's inside of the photo instead of having a directional. For example, see image on left, see image above. As those images flow onto social media, flow into a digital distribution point, that directional information is going to change because the link between the caption and the image is going to be slightly different in every single reader. You want to make sure that that image and the caption are linked together and it won't be confusing because, hey, there is no image on the left. Glyphs and characters can be easily misinterpreted. If you are adding a checkbox, a play button, if I accidentally tap on that, nothing happens, I think this article is broken. So just be careful with what glyphs you are adding to a story. And then hard returns, non-breaking spaces, and non-breaking hyphens. This is a hard one for editors, but when you are originally writing the story, try to get out of the habit of hard returns, non-breaking spaces, and non-breaking hyphens. You can instead use a discretionary hyphen. But the real goal here is that if I look at the same story and it's being flowed onto two different devices, I don't want to add a hard return because if I do that, how it's going to flow into the next device is going to be dramatically changed. So let the content dynamically wrap inside of a dynamic and distribution channel. And when it comes down to print, that's where you can go back in. And if you want to change the line wrap, please do. But you don't want to start off with it. You want to only finish with that if possible. Last big area here is that SEO. If I am working on a magazine, I know that I need to start thinking about making sure that my headlines are search engine optimized. So on the left-hand side, here is my magazine with a few stories. On the right-hand side, I now have headlines that, oh, this tells me a little bit more what the story is about. The person who originated the story and wrote it will always be the person who understands the story the best. So they could be thinking up front what some of these headlines could potentially be. Think of this as being another component or another metadata field that could be added to your story. So you're writing all of these SEO headlines and making sure that everything is optimized up front, as opposed to trying to scramble down the line or making one person try to go through your entire magazine and trying to write all of these headlines for you. So it's just a little bit of reorganizing culturally how you're thinking about making sure that all of these stories are distributed. All right, and with that, I am going to switch over to a demo. So one moment here.
Hello everyone, this is a demonstration of channel neutral publishing. In the top right hand corner of Studio, I have the option to create new. If I select this option, it will allow me to create an article. This is the channel neutral article that I want to use that is going to be published in multiple locations. So from here I can select my template. I'm going to just use my multi-channel template and click next. From here it's going to ask me to give my article a name, and I can select what brand, my issue, category, status, and any of the different metadata fields associated with my article. When I do that, it's going to create a new article. And you'll see that I have some boxes that I can type directly into. So here I could have my crosshead, title, and you'll see that as I'm typing into them, that pink highlight goes away. That means I actually have text in the field, and it's no longer that non-printing display text. Now I'm going to jump ahead because you can see that I am creating, or I'm writing into these different components. That's what each of these different text bars are. And I want to jump ahead to an article that's already a little bit more fleshed out and created. So I'm just going to switch tabs and go to an article that I already have created. And here we go. I've got this basic bunny article. It's got a headline, it's got a byline, a deck, some body copy. And the way that this article works inside of Studio is that I have different components. So here I have a title component, and I can select any of the different title options that are already selected. So think of these as being a little bit like your paragraph styles. I've got some different style variants for what my author could be, some deck styles, body styles, so on and so forth. So think of these as being your different pieces that are creating your article. Now, the cool part about this is that I want this same article to go to many places simultaneously. Now, if you've set this all up correctly and set a lot of things up in advance, we can make that happen for you. So what I'm going to do is in the top right-hand corner, I'm going to click this Publish option. And if I go to Publish, these are the different channels that I can publish my article to. So for today, I'm going to send this to my Apple News Zone, going to send this to Twixel, maybe even to WordPress, and why not, I will email it to myself just for fun. So in addition to that, we can also publish to Emacs, we can publish to PugPig. If I select this Publish option, you'll see in the bottom right-hand corner, you'll see that the article has been published. Now that just means that it's gone up to our server to package that article and deliver it to all of its various endpoints. If I go over to iCloud, I'll go ahead and refresh just so that we get the latest article. It's going to take a minute to refresh. There we go. There is my article that I was just working on. And if I select the View option, yes, please, open in Apple News. Here is that same article inside of Apple News Publisher. Okay. If I go over to Twixel, here is my demo Twixel environment. If I select that article, show HTML article, that's fine. Here we go, same article, two different platforms. So inside of Twixel, what you're viewing, this is the HTML, CSS version of the article. Inside of Apple News, that is the Apple News JSON specified article that is specific to that endpoint. Now, if I go back to that same article, this time I'm going to back out of it. What I want to do here, or what I can do, I'm going to delete these two so that you can watch me do this. I want to take this same article and I want to send it to print. What we're going to do is we're going to create a print variant. When I do that, it is going to say, all right, I want to take this article, flow it onto a layout template, and I want to create a print article out of a template. So what I'm doing here is I have a bunny template all lined up, ready to go. And I have a conversion rule that says if we have this component in the digital article, this is what it's going to land on inside of the element label and using this print paragraph style. You can also specify a location based on the InDesign article grouping. So if you have a couple of InDesign articles all within the same layout, you can pick and choose where you want that to go. As soon as I click this next option, it's going to ask me to give it a name. I'll just leave it at that same name. That's fine. And click OK. You notice that I have two new files created. So here's that InDesign article. Here's the InCopy article. I'm going to open up my InDesign and go to Studio. And if I open up that InDesign file that we just generated, you'll get to see some of the magic of things are placing in the background automatically. Now what we have here is, here's the title, here's the image, a byline. I purposely have the deck lumped into the body component so that you can see you can have multiple components flow all into the same big text box. Or you can set it up so that you can see that I have a text box over on the right-hand side. So this allows all of that copy that you're creating to get onto that print page much faster than if the designer has to copy paste from your website. It's up to you if you want to have all of this content flow nicely into a template, or if you want to have everything go onto the pasteboard and then let the designer finesse and work their magic. This is a little bit about the multi-channel workflow and the ability to have an article published to many platforms simultaneously. Thanks.
All right. And with that, I will switch over to question and answer session.
Yes, that's great. Thank you. Thank you for the demo. I hope the audience is happy by seeing how they can handle the multi-channel publishing. I've just reminded the audience that they can ask questions in the side panel on the right. We have a few minutes left. I can see one question, which is more of a consultation, and maybe you can comment on that, Dani. It's from Chris McCall. On the poll, another challenge is the perception of workload to sub-edit content built to print into digital and vice versa. Do you have any comments on this, Dani?
It varies based on the publication and their strategy. So I've seen some publishers who have really embraced this, and they have gone fully into multi-channel neutral to the point where everything is created digitally, and then they have automation set up to generate their print content on demand. Their print content is not as pretty as their website is. Whereas you also have magazines that are more style-based, and so they want their magazine to be highly designed. They want to have all of those touch points of making sure everything finalized. So it's going to vary based on every publication, what their goals are, how much they want to keep designed versus how much they want to streamline. Again, it's just making sure that you have that centralized goal as to this is what we are trying to go for, and we want to streamline a little bit. If you can get, let's say, 50% of your magazine into a template, let the other 50% be stylized, I would say that that's a fair goal to start off with.
Great. We have a lot of questions coming in, so I'm gonna read them one by one.
Okay, sure.
Greetings to Sabrina Meyer. She's thanking you for the webinar. No question from her. Richard Perry has a longer question. We are a print-based company in transition to digital platforms using the digital article. However, we find that the Digi article is only subbed, and so far, the finished article is completed within the VCML INC. Now there is a discrepancy between the Digi and print. Can you elaborate more on this question?
Yeah, absolutely. So present day, there is a very firm break between print and digital. So if you start with the digital article, and then as soon as you select the create print variant, it creates a new print article version. And that print article is very separate. So if I change something in the print article, it is different from the digital article. However, we're working on a feature that will allow you to sync digital to print. So for example, if I am working on that digital article and I change the headline from bunnies in the garden to puppies in the garden, I change the digital article, that same article is still linked to print, and then the print article will now change to puppies in the garden. So that is in development now, and it is being worked on, and we know that that is a popular feature that people are looking for. So it's coming.
Thank you, Dani. Hope Richard is going to be happy soon with that new feature, and his organization, of course. A question from Lindsay Martin. Most of our submissions come in as MS Word and Excel. How does one import that to your system?
Oh, interesting question. If they're coming in as Excel documents, you would probably need an integration to convert them. I believe that you could use something like WoodWing Connect to take the Word file, take the Excel document, repopulate them as a digital article if you need to. So that would be something that you could do.
Okay. Thank you. Question from Juliana Ducey about digital article. How can I improve my article with, for example, an SEO description or SEO title? I need to enrich and publish my article using this metadata property.
First area is understanding what endpoint you're going to. So let's say that we're publishing to WordPress. And inside of WordPress, there are specific metadata fields that WordPress can have SEO optimization for and story description. So when the story goes from Studio over to WordPress, you want to gather those Studio metadata fields and make sure that they map into your endpoint. So you're able to create it from Studio up front and then making sure that it carries to wherever you are going to. So a lot of this is make sure that it's in the metadata and then check that mapping.
Okay, thank you. Another question from Brita. How complex is it to create the components as a basis for content use in different channels?
It depends on what channels you want to go to. So that's the first one. And the component set itself, it defines what types of components you have. So technically you don't have to create a new component set for every single channel. You could just use exactly what we have out of the box to go to majority of these different channels. If you want to change the way that these components look on each and every single different platform or on different articles, instead what you're using is something called a look and feel. Inside of Studio, the look and feel contains the CSS of what this is going to look like. So if you are a web developer, think of this as this is where all of your CSS style sheets are hidden. This is where the HTML is. So technically, you don't have to do custom component sets unless you want to. If you want to, that's great. I've seen some very beautiful creative things, but it's a matter of, do you want to build this all into the component set or do you want to do it through the look and feel? Personally, I think it's easier to do it through the interface inside of the look and feel, but both work.
Okay, great. Another question from Richard Perry. Do you find that users still use Word to construct the content first features, like find and change in WoodWing Studio, browser, article creation? Did you understand the question?
Okay, I'm going to separate that question into two separate pieces. Do I see people still using Microsoft Word? Yes, it happens. If they are using Microsoft Word, most of the companies that I've seen have some sort of integration or a way to take that same content and then reflow it into an HTML format or strip it down into HTML so that they can put it back into an article format, and then they can reflow it into something that can be dynamic. So that's the first question. Second question, I had it and then I lost it. Can you repeat the question so that I make sure?
Do you find that users still use Word to construct the content first features, like find and change in Studio, browser,
find and change? Yes. That's it. Okay. So inside of the browser, Studio works on a browser. So if you do a find while you're using Studio and using the digital editor, you can automatically go in, quickly find all of the different words that you need. It is right now something that you would have to go in, retype, and then do that replace. But in the future, it would be something that I would love to add if there's interest. So if you guys are interested in that, let me know.
And another question from Brita, should we unify the structure of all channels before doing component mapping?
I would start creating that list. Yes, that's a really good question, because I've seen some companies, when they start to create their component list, they first are thinking only print. So what you want to be doing is thinking both print and digital, whatever those channels are, and then creating the list of components from there. And then using that component list, you can make sure that everything flows to print or to digital or where it needs to go. Really good question.
Okay, best workflow for students' books, not magazines, from Francisco Barros.
That's almost a trick question. As a product manager, I absolutely want to say, please use digital articles. I would love for everyone to do that. We do know that there are some book publishers that are using Studio for it. And the real challenge here is that most book publishers are used to using ePublication, right? Because ePub has more of that fixed design. But if you start to embrace dynamic content and the way that things are reflowed, there's probably ways that you can create components in a way that can also be beautiful on tablet, web, wherever it needs to go. It's just a matter of, will your digital editors, will your art directors, will your editors-in-chief, will they all embrace something that can be more dynamically distributed? And I can't answer that, unfortunately. That's something that can only be answered from brand to brand.
Okay, and because we've run out of time, I have one last question, which is quite lengthy, so you can choose to whether you want to cover it now or we send an email message to the person that asked. Will the digital to print sync allow for combined components in a print layout? That's
Yes.
the one question. For example, where the crosshead component is combined into the body text on a print layout, then manually styled onto the print layout. Will the print layout styles be retained when the digital article is resynced with changes?
No, that's the one part. So if you have the different components that flow down into or if you have the digital components that flow down into print, they can merge. You can have the components stacked together inside of the same text box. Not a problem. That's fine. If you go into the layout and you start to manually change it, meaning I make things green, blue, I start retyping the article. As soon as you resync that article from the digital article, you could potentially lose those overrides depending on what the overrides are. I would say wait until it comes out into a beta format. Get that installed on your computer or on your server. We'd love to see what your feedback is, how you're using it, what works, what doesn't work. So I'd be interested to see the use cases.
Okay, and as a lot of thank you messages, and in case and thank you all for attending the webinar today. We've gone overboard with the planned time. I know everybody's super busy, as also as Dani. I want to thank you once again, Dani, for this nice and very useful session for our audience. You see Dani's email address here on the screen, everybody, so you can message her directly if you have any follow-up questions. We will revise the questions you left in the side panel, and Dani will, of course, reach out to you that you didn't receive a response to answer your queries. Thank you so much once again. Wishing everybody a lovely rest of the day, evening, or morning, and hope to see you soon again next time.
Thank you all so much.